Hello everybody, it's I, Riffraff Hornhelm, and I'm back again with another presentation from the Dwarven Vault, and today we're doing another monster review. And, of course, we're still sticking with dragons, so what do we have today? Today we have probably the most iconic dragon when everybody thinks of Dungeons and Dragons. It's been on the covers, it's been shown an awful lot. It is the star of movies, it's really, really cool, the Red Dragon, or, as it's known, Draco, Conflagratio, Horribilis. What a name, huh? Isn't that great? And what would you expect? I mean, everybody knows the Red Dragon. And I'm going to tell you why it's overrated. Now, from a dragon standpoint, these are very competent. They are rare, but not impossible to find. They are large, almost 50 feet long. They have 9 to 11 hit dice. Like all of the dragons we've been talking about, as we get to the more iconic dragons, you find that their armor class is lower. This one is -1. And while they have exceptionally high intelligence, they're not the best spell using dragon that's out there. I mean, 40% of the time is all they have in terms of spells. They'll only be able to use spells 40% of the time. Speaking, 75%. In their lairs, well, only about 20%. And of course, their spell usability is somewhat limited. They can get as high as a 4th level spell, and they start with a couple of 1st and 2nd, the normal of what you find there. And by the time they reach Ancient Old status, they can have up to 2 spells each, 1st through 4th level. Now that's not bad. And it's certainly better than many of the other evil dragons that are out there. And of course, this is a evil dragon. Considered, other than Tiamat, the most evil and nasty of all the evil dragons in the original Monster Manual. And of course, what we're doing is from the original Monster Manual for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. One of the 12 total dragons and one of the 6 colored dragons, as opposed to metallic. So, I made a pretty bold statement at the start here saying that I think they're overrated. I truly do. I mean, yes, they have their claw bite. They're 9 to 11 hit dice, so it's not exactly like they're pushovers. And they have the ability to use up to 4th level spells, which is pretty compelling. But when only 75% of them can speak and 40% of that is able to cast a spell, that leaves a lot of dragon out there that's probably not as iconic as we've seen in movies and books and various forms of media entertainment. And not the least of which is within Dungeons and Dragons itself, where it's been highlighted so very heavily. So what else makes me think that it's overrated? Well, once again, you have to remember that this is from a dwarvish perspective. Fire and dwarves get along a bit better than other races and fire. We take a little bit less damage because it's fire. That's not what's in the game. Not in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This is the Hornhelms. We take more damage from electricity, less damage from fire. Red dragons really don't bother us as much as they do some other races. But of course, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, there is a strong expectation that somewhere in the process, a red dragon is going to show up. Red dragons are incredibly avaricious, greedy, and frankly, a little bit easy to trick. I mean, think of Smaug from Tolkien. That's a pretty good example of a red dragon. Now, where do red dragons like to hang out? Well, once again, they all lair in underground caverns or similar type spaces but they live in mountains and hilly areas. Though, of course, red dragons seem to end up everywhere. Though they are rare, you would think they're, well, at the very worst, uncommon. That's not really true. The red dragon, though it is a competent dragon in terms of being a difficult creature to overcome, is still not as bad as the, or not as capable as the equivalent metallic dragon. Though they do have this wonderful fire breath, and that's what everybody remembers, is a big blast of fire coming from the red dragon and decimating the party. That can certainly happen. But at the same time, it's also one that is a little more vulnerable than some of the other dragons that you would expect to find in the evil pantheon. They're nasty, but they're not something you can't overcome. And once again, because they generally can speak, and 75%, that's a pretty good chance, and because they're incredibly avaricious and greedy and think they're smarter than everybody else and evil as evil can be, they tend to have a weak spot when it comes to negotiation. They can be misled, they can definitely be tricked, but there's a little bit of risk that comes with it. The red dragon is going to be a very tough opponent unless you prepare yourself accordingly. It's fire. So if you're a player group, you need to make sure that you have the appropriate magic or armor or whatever it's going to take to help make it a little bit easier to deal with them. Really, the best situation with a red dragon is negotiate it into a position of weakness. And I think that can be done fairly readily. Now, what did our folks think? I mean, we went out and talked to the Hornhelm extended clan, and from a DM standpoint, all of them said pretty much the same. That yes, they're nasty, but they tend to be overrated. And really, on a scale of 1 to 10, most of them came back and said, yeah, it's a fairly solid 8. Definitely not a 10. Definitely no higher than an 8. And when we talked to players, they were fairly similar. They tended to rate it a bit higher, an 8 to a 9, but they still thought that they were something that could be overcome. And some players I talked to actually rated it lower than 8. They said that, especially as dwarves, that this was one that could be managed, especially because they were so because they weren't really as smart as they thought they were. If you had a clever person with them, you could really negotiate them into a position of weakness, so to speak. Now, don't get me wrong. That's pushback on a creature that is absolutely legendary within Dungeons and Dragons. The red dragon is probably one of the very first creatures that you think of. I mean, it's in the name. Dungeons and Dragons, and really when you see their material over the years, though Tiamat's been used as well, really the red dragon is the most common representation of a dragon that's shown within the game. So you can expect to run into them, there's no question about that. But if you do, I think if you're prepared, you're not in that bad a shape. And frankly, because it's the red dragon and everybody thinks about it, it tends to be one of the dragons that people are more aware of the operating details of and are better prepared to handle from an adventure standpoint. Now, once again, like everything else in the game, the red dragon has morphed considerably over the years as it's been changed as we've gone through the iterations of the game, resulting in the current 5e or 5e plus or whatever is just about to come out. And we understand that there's some big differences. If you're using the original Monster Manual, you really should be using Advanced Dungeons & Dragons as the the rules that you're going to use for your adventure. Otherwise, frankly, in today's world, the red dragon in the Monster Manual would be underpowered. So remember, when you're playing this character, prey upon its avariciousness, its greediness, things that you can do to entice it so that you can get it in the position you need to get it into in order to slay it or subdue it or whatever you're going to do to get around that obstacle. Not that tough. The red dragon, at least to me, from a player standpoint, is a little bit disappointing. It's not as difficult as I thought it would be, and my players have found that a red dragon is definitely something you can stand up to. It's vulnerable. So, certainly iconic, but probably too well known. That's our view today of the red dragon. Hope you found this enjoyable and educational and informational. And if you did, leave us a like, drop us a comment, share. Please consider subscribing, but most of all, come back and see us again real soon. Take care, everyone, and remember, dwarves rock!